Happy holidays, my friends. We did it. We made it through the year. Time now for rest and inspiration. This week is a best of episode. I'm sharing a favorite episode from this year that I know you'll enjoy. I'm also sharing some cool things via email. So if you are not on my list yet, hop on over to sandrasky.com and click the Yes, Inspire Me button and send me your info. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me. I'm super excited about what the new year holds for all of us. Welcome to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. I'm your host, Sandra Sciano. As I'm coming up on 1 year of my podcast, I've been reflecting on all the things I've spoken about, and I'm also planning out the content for my second year. Having a weekly show, it takes a lot of discipline. And in that, I mean scheduling, the tech, but most of all, the ideas. There's planning and there's inspiration. In the work I do, I develop a lot of content, not only for myself, but for the clients that I work with. So understanding what inspires you and where to find it so that you can go and retrieve it when you need it. Now that is some fairy dust. I mean, just imagine inspiration on demand. Things could be so easy, and it can be to a certain extent. So today we're talking about inspiration. You're listening to the Long Game Podcast with Sandra Sciano. In a world where everyone is doing, it's easy to get lost in a sea of comparison, secret tricks, and promises of overnight success. The long game is my approach to business. The actual day in and day out philosophy that you have to show up, you have to do the work, and there's no quick fixes for long-term success. I'm a web designer, digital strategist, and energetic thinker, and I'm here to share the process and lessons I experience with my clients daily who are going through the same struggles of building a business as you are. We'll hear from successful entrepreneurs sharing their long game strategies, and I'm fun, so we're going to have a little fun along the way too. Thanks for being here. Let's get to today's episode. People always say that they get their best ideas in the shower. And there's some scientific truth to that. In the shower, we let our guard down. It's relaxing and dopamine's released. Our mind has the ability to wander, making connections and subconsciously problem solving. Things come to the surface as ideas and answers. And I also think that it has to do with, being isolated inside the shower walls. It's alone time where not many outside influences can take hold. So what works for you? Where do you find your inspiration? Is it in the shower or out in nature? Of course, from traveling, and we love that travel gives us so much. It's such an experience. But what about your day-to-day inspiration? Of course, unless you are living a traveling lifestyle all the time, you're home more. And especially as of late, we're all tied to home more. So there's a need to be able to fill your cup right in your own kitchen. We all know the classic 80s film 9 to 5, right? Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, Dolly Parton. So the three of these women team up for some wild escapades of fantasy come to life. For those of you who have never seen the movie, I can't even imagine that, or you need a refresher. The three ladies work together in a corporate office for a very chauvinist boss. Each one with their own distinct personality, they become unlikely friends. And one night over drinks, they fantasize about doing their boss in. The movie's a real hoot. So I heard an interview with Jane Fonda where she shared the story and inspiration for 9 to 5. She already had the idea for the film from a friend of hers who became an organizer of secretaries in big institutions, things like hospitals and banks, places where they have rows of cubicles. And the friend would tell Jane these terrible stories of how the women were treated. So she went out one night, and that was the first time she ever saw Lily Tomlin, who was performing her one-woman show in search of intelligent life in the universe. Jane fell in love with Lily as a comedian that night. the persona she did on stage. And then she went home and she changed the premise of 9 to 5 to include Lily Tomlin. Jane said, I don't want to make a movie about secretaries if she's not in it. So she got Lily Tomlin involved. And then driving home one day from a meeting with Lily, she had the radio on in her car, and Dolly Parton came on singing the song Two Doors Down, which I'm going to have a link to it in the show notes, because if you go and listen, it's very reminiscent of the hit song 9 to 5. Wouldn't that be interesting, Jane thought to herself. Dolly Parton never did a movie, and she determined that the movie would need to be a comedy if she brought in Dolly Parton and Lily Tomlin, and that she would have to play the least interesting role. So she created her character, Judy Burnley, for that, who, if you recall, is really a wallflower. And it took a year to convince Lily and Dolly both to do it. So once everyone was on board, including the director, they did a focus group of 40 women secretaries as research for the project. The director asked, do any of you fantasize about what you would like to do to your boss? Oh my, so many things that they couldn't put in the movie, Jane said. These women had a lot of stories to tell. But listening to your audience created this great art. And so there's a few points that I want to explore with this story. First, that Jane didn't know Lily, but fell in love with her artistry. And she was so moved by her performance that she changed the course of what she was doing. So point one, she disrupted her own process of what she was creating by adding in what she became so inspired by and so influenced by. Comedy wasn't part of the idea at first. She wasn't looking for a character, but she was open to it. And she was open to what the performance did to her. And when that magic happened, she acted on it. Point two, driving can be like showering. It's that solitary experience sometimes where, you can be engaged, but your mind can also be thinking. There's something to take in terms of the view. And the moment can be right. It can be a good mix of like zen and stimulation. But it also has to do with what you expose yourself to. If Jane was listening to classical music in the car, she may have had an entirely different epiphany or no epiphany at all. I love finding things that I hear or watch and then build upon them. Part of being an energetic thinker for me is the spark of ideas I get from taking something in. It's like the launchpad effect. It starts with one thing and then sparks these other ideas. Much like referencing the story of inspiration, I had already had some notes on the topic. I knew I wanted to talk about inspiration on my podcast, so I knew that idea was already there. Then when I heard this interview, it clicked. All of the ideas clicked together with what was already milling inside my head. This goes back to the idea of noticing. Noticing while you're scanning or reading or on social. What jumps out at you? Then following up on that idea and building it out. I talk about having an idea bank on Evernote where I put all these little tidbits that spark ideas or relate to the work that I do. Point three is all about listening. The creative ideas that came out to them were because they listened to this underheard audience. Those women were ready to share, and they did not hold back. It showed how far things went, how deep their feelings were running. And we talk here a lot about listening to your audience. Listen to the questions that they're asking so that you can develop your products. Listen to the words that you're using to better write your copy. The antics that transpired in the film 9 to 5, kidnapping the boss, hog-tying him, and then rigging him up to a pulley system, and then going into the office and making a ton of positive changes, all came from listening to the stories of the women in this situation. So they used the stories as inspiration, and they created a pop culture masterpiece. And in the end, I like that the story was feminist. It was women taking back the power. So there are a myriad of ways to be inspired. By the people you spend your time with, the cultural pieces you expose yourself to, the art, the music, all of that. and the disrupting of your own process. It's in the noticing, the listening, the experience, and being open to where the dots are connected. And I will say that inspiration hits when the idea is already mulling about inside your head. So the idea can be very vague, and inspiration can bring you closer to refining your idea. Or the idea can be very specific, like a problem you're trying to solve, so that you look at things for their potentiality of being a solution. You kind of size everything up. Inspiration comes easiest when you're relaxed and mindful, or sometimes just mindless even, right? It's the shower piece or the driving piece where you're able to be alone with your thoughts. And as a mom, I have developed a very special skill where I can just tune all that shit out and be in my own world, sitting in my living room with everybody there. And I can find things that build ideas in what is surrounding me. It's like my own form of meditation. You don't always have to be alone. You just have to get into the mindset of being inspired. So keep yourself open. Track your ideas. Like writing things down helps to keep them from fleeting. And that's why I use Evernote, because it's on my phone, it's on my iPad, it's on my laptop. I can access the ideas wherever I need to. Read, watch, ponder, get your body moving, do all these things that kind of get the energy going. You know, I get so much inspiration on my daily walks with my dog while I'm either listening to an audiobook or listening to a podcast. I kind of take it all in while my body's moving. And then most importantly, implement the inspiration that comes to you. You know, make your work shine from these new ideas and the different energy that comes from all of these places. You know, it goes back to that idea of you've got to just start. So implement the inspiration. Okay, folks, I'm going to leave you with that today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for joining me today. You can access more info in the show notes at thelonggamepodcast.net. If today's show connected with you in some way, please share it with your friends or hop on iTunes and leave me a review. Until next time, keep playing the long game. This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.